Hello guys, and welcome back to our responding to the Korra defense. And this time we are on part 5 where we're talking about bending and martial arts. And like I said, guys, I'm really interested in this part because one of the things that I really loved about Avatar: The Last Airbender was the use of traditional Chinese martial arts in the bending. I'm a practitioner of martial arts myself. My primary martial art of practice was Muay Thai because I competed in that, but I did study a few others like capoeira and karate and judo, but I also did train in tiger-style kung fu, which was a lot of fun. It's a very fascinating martial art, but then again, I've just studied a bunch of different martial arts just to kind of understand how they work and their history and the reasons behind them. So this is going to be very fun for me. I can't wait to go into it, so let's not wait any longer and dive right in.
Bending night in Republic City, and have we got a doozy for you?
And speaking of bending, another thing that's kind of in retcon territory, but kind of not, is the way that bending works in The Legend of Korra. Specifically with these side forms of bending that were considered rare in The Last Airbender, such as lightning bending, lava bending, metal bending, blood bending without a full moon, and the very controversial energy bending, as well as the idea that bending is somehow no longer sacred because it's being used for sport and the adoption of more modern fighting styles. People seem to think that these things being more common in The Legend of Korra somehow devalues them in The Last Airbender, or that they contradict it somehow, and that shit's just all bogus.
Okay, I'll lay this out for you. It devalues them because the more you have of something, the less value it has. Think about it. In terms of basic economic materials, why is platinum or gold more valuable than nickel? Because of the scarcity. When something is rare, when something is hard to obtain, hard to get, when there's only one or two of these things in existence, they're going to be very, very valuable. It's kind of like what Syndrome said in The Incredibles.
I'll sell my invention so that everyone can be superheroes. Everyone can be super. And when everyone's super, no one will be.
The less of, like I said, the less of something there is, the more value can accrue. The more of something there is, the less value can accrue. Toph being able to metal bend, for example, was incredible and something only she could do because using her seismic sense, she could sense the earth and the metal and manipulate it. Something that only her unique situation allowed for her, turning her weakness into her greatest strength. She was the one and only metal bender. Now, well, there's a whole academy for it, and it's hardly anything special anymore. Since most earthbenders we see in Legend of Korra are capable of it, or at least shown to have the ability, if not the training, then it lacks the same value that it did when Toph first discovered it. It's no longer as special, it's no longer as unique, it's lost some of that value. I won't speak to the others yet, but that's just an example of what I mean. Even if the show can't explain why these are more commonplace, that doesn't mean the powers are more amazing or impressive. Seeing Toph bend metal for the first time when we first thought it impossible was incredible. Now seeing most of the police force being able to do it in just the first season, most of Kuvira's military is able to do it, and a giant mecha tank is powered by it, now it's like a song being played too often. It loses the unique elements that made it so powerful. Toph's achievements no longer seem that impressive. The same goes for the other bending arts. But again, I'll talk about those later. Let's keep going.
We're gonna go through all of them. First up is lightning bending. People seem to think that bending lightning was some kind of rare ability, and it was, but not as rare as you'd think. According to Iroh in The Last Airbender,
only a select few firebenders can separate these energies. This creates an imbalance. The energy wants to restore balance, and in the moment the positive and negative energy come crashing back together. You provide release and guidance, creating lightning.
In other words, lightning bending can only be performed if one has a clear mind free of turmoil. The reason we don't see people doing it left and right in The Last Airbender is because not everyone has the ability to clear their mind easily. And there's also evidence to support the idea that in Aang's time, the ability was only shared within members of the Fire Nation royal family, which explains why only Ozai, Iroh, and Azula knew about it and could use it. The reason Zuko couldn't do it was because his mind was full of inner conflict. After the 100-Year War, there was a lot more cultural mixing between nations, and word of the lightning bending technique was spread around the world that even during the end of the 100 Years' War, we see that people knew about it, with the play on Ember Island featuring it. Knowledge of the technique spread, so more firebenders around the world were able to use it, since it was no longer a Fire Nation secret at that point. The reason Mako can do it is because he's always been considered calm in intense situations, and we don't even know anything about some of the background characters that are doing it, so we can't even say that they break the rules. As you'll see with many of these bending styles, it's perfectly reasonable that fighting styles and techniques would change and evolve over the 70-year gap between the two series.
Okay, so firstly, Iroh did not say it was a secret technique. He simply said only a few firebenders can do it. Just because we see only the royal family doing it doesn't mean others possibly couldn't. But again, that's speculatory, and you admitted it was speculatory. The real point I want to make is that even if it was a family secret, that doesn't suddenly mean people can just easily figure it out. There's a difference between knowing that something exists and being a master in it. When we see Mako bending lightning for the first time, it's around the same time that he's struggling to pay for his brother and himself to live. He's dealing with a lot of turmoil and struggle that he doesn't even notice Asami run into him. If I remember right, it was right after we see him working in the factory that we see him walk across the street without looking and get nailed by Asami on her scooter. He's clearly distracted. The show is trying to show us how distracted and worked up he is and how difficult this is for him right now. And now suddenly he's able to clear his mind enough to work. And not only that, we see a bunch of nameless other people lightning bending right next to him. No name, no face. We don't know anything about them. It's just become devalued. It's like I said before, when more and more people are capable of this, the fact that it's doable is no longer as interesting. And then if we have no face people, no name people able to do it, that just means that the whole mysticism behind it when Iroh is talking about it is kind of lost. There's no more, oh wow, this is such a legendary cool technique that only a few firebenders can do. No, we can hire people on a factory line to do it. So it's not quite as valuable. It almost feels like you could replace it. The way Iroh described it made it seem just like the act of doing it was difficult and took lots of time, focus, and even perhaps a new way of understanding the world. But now we can hire dudes capable of it off the streets to work a factory line. The mysticism behind the art is a little gone now, replaced by the mundane and the average. That's the reason why it's undervalued. And here's the thing. I want to make this clear as we go through this. I'm not saying that adding more of these bending styles is a bad thing inherently. You can add more of these. The progression of time would allow for this. As time passes and new things are learned, yeah, lightning bending might get learned by more people. Yeah, metal bending might get learned by more people. It makes sense, narratively speaking and world speaking. But your question was, why are they devalued? And that's the reason. Once Toph figured out metal bending and she was the only one to do it, she is the cool one. She is the cool number one only metal bender. Now, lots of people can do it. It's not quite as cool. When we saw Ozai, Azula, and Iroh bending lightning, that was cool. Only 3 people we knew about could bend lightning. It was so awesome. Now, we have a factory line of them. Not quite as cool, not quite as valuable. It's become a little mundane. So, not saying it doesn't make sense, saying that's the reason it's been devalued.
Next up, we got lava bending, a technique that was once thought to be exclusive to avatars using both earth and fire bending. In The Legend of Korra, however, we learn that this is not the case, since both Bolin and Ghazan are lava benders, proving that all it takes is an earth bender to bend lava. To some people, this is seen as some kind of inconsistency or another of Legend of Korra's series-ruining retcons, when neither of these are the case. It's never said in The Last Airbender that bending lava is something only an avatar can do. The reason some people think that this is the case was because of a fact from Avatar Extras, a rebroadcast of the original series with little fact bubbles about the episodes popping up every now and again. One of these extras stated that lava bending was a combination of earth bending and fire bending, so many people assumed that only avatars could do it and ran with it. The problem with this is that the extras are largely considered by the community to be unreliable. Some of what is said in them is canon, but those ultimately boil down to slight disambiguations or clarifications, and have actually been wrong several times. This is largely because Mike and Brian didn't actually write these extras, they were actually written by staff writer Joshua Hamilton. Since these extras didn't come directly from Bryke, then their legitimacy should be questioned. Anyways, a lot of people for the longest time thought that lava bending was a combination of earth and fire bending, and we know now that that's not true. However, if we look into how bending works, lava bending makes perfect sense, and it certainly fits the characters who use it. Firstly, temperature manipulation is something common to all elements. Fire benders should be pretty obvious, and water benders can lower the temperature of their water to freeze it, so it stands to reason that the same applies to the other elements. Lava is literally just molten rock. It's earth that was heated enough to where it melts and becomes a liquid. So by virtue of lava being pure earth, it makes perfect sense that an earthbender should be able to bend it, and with enough training, can manipulate its temperature. Toph mentions that lava bending is a very rare ability, and I think I have an answer for why, though keep in mind that this is more of a theory than anything else. We all know that bending is genetic. Just look at Aang and Katara's kids. One came out an airbender, one got airbending later, and the other a waterbender. Also remember that nations had been ethnically separated for a very long time, so the reason you don't see an earthbender in the water tribe is because no earthbenders lived there to pass on their ability. This all changed with Republic City, which is a melting pot of people from all nations, meaning more genetic diversity. Bolin is the son of an Earth Kingdom citizen and a Fire Nation citizen, so he has both Earth and Firebender genetics. Since he's a regular human and not the Avatar, he can only bend one element, which happened to be Earth, yet he still has traits that you'd expect of a Firebender in heat manipulation, but it only applies to his Earthbending. I can't say the same for Ghazan since we don't know anything about his past, so it may also be chalked up to lava bending being something so exceptionally rare that only 1 or 2 people are born with it every so often, which would also explain why we didn't see any lava benders in The Last Airbender.
I have little to say here because we don't see enough lava bending to really give a lot of context to it. Toph saying it's a rare ability is all I can say too. It's rare. In my opinion, it's fine with how they showed it, and I think Matt's theory as to why it's rare is a fair one. So, nothing to add here. I think that's fair.
Next, let's look at metal bending. I'm not really sure why some people have a problem with metal bending since it was explained in The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra doesn't contradict it in any way, but a lot of people seem to think that this is a rare ability much like lava bending, so it shouldn't make sense that so many people can use it. This was never said to be the case, and the abundance of metal benders has nothing to do with The Legend of Korra. In the Avatar comics, Toph starts the very first metal bending academy with just a few students, and it's implied that by the time of The Legend of Korra, she has expanded worldwide. This comic was made to connect the dots between the two series and is considered canon, so deal with that. I don't care if you don't like it, fuck you.
Okay, you can say that, but the fact is that lots of people aren't going to know about the comic and are only basing their knowledge on what the show gave them. Because of this, you can't blame them for not connecting those dots. If the creators aren't going to mention it in the show and quickly throw it into a comic to make up for the lack of explanation in the show, then don't blame the audience for not catching it. So don't tell them to, don't say F you because they don't know about the comic or don't quite accept the comic. In my opinion, I'd be a little slow to accept the comic too. Now, I'm not saying the comic isn't valid or canon. Maybe it is, but at the same time, it's just a comic. Many people don't know about the comics. So maybe you could have said, hey, here's a comic, go read it to learn the details. That's what I would have said.
Metal bending was also never stated in any canon medium to be any rare ability that only a select few can use, so I'm not sure where this idea is coming from. If Toph can invent the technique without any prior training, then it's perfectly reasonable for other earthbenders to do it too, since the basis of technique is to use Toph's vibrational sensing technique, which we've seen Aang is able to do, meaning anyone can do it. By the time of The Legend of Korra, they've also likely found an easier way than that to learn metal bending, allowing even more earthbenders to do it. Again, I'm not sure why this is an issue or how it devalues The Last Airbender, but I've seen it floating around, so figured I'd mention it.
Okay, well, I talked about it earlier, but I'll briefly explain again. The issue with it is that the guru introduced how metal bending could work. He said that because metal is just refined earth, then even it could be bended if the earthbender could feel the earth within the metal. Toph, using her seismic vision, could sense the slag and metal and could bend that. What made it so cool was the fact that her weakness became her strength. Her weakness granted her access to a power that was once thought impossible. It was a miracle that only she could achieve through her special gifts and training. Now, anyone and their mother can do it. And by what you just said, they might not even need Toph's seismic ability to do it. They might have discovered new ways to do it. And to me, and many others, that devalues the ability even more because we wanted to admire Toph for doing the impossible through an unlikely means. We like to see the unbelievable come out of the improbable. When a man in a wheelchair stands up to cheer his son on in a football game. When a dog shoots a basketball to win the game in a movie like Air Bud. When a gorilla protects a boy who falls into their pen at the zoo when a gorilla actually might have beaten them up. The miracle is only miraculous when it's something we wouldn't expect and something that couldn't happen often. Now that anyone can do it, even without Toph's abilities, the miracle is now less miraculous. That is what people take issue with for the most part. I personally don't care. As it stands to reason, that metal bending could be refined, and I have no problem with other people learning the technique since Toph was able to teach Aang how to feel the earth around him like she could. So perhaps others could do it as well. I'm simply pointing out why it does indeed take away from the miraculous aspect of the art and devalues it. Again, when everyone is super, no one is. So therefore, when every earthbender can metal bend, or every earthbender is shown to be capable of metal bending, even without Toph's training, it loses a bit of the wonder to it. It loses a bit of the miraculous quality.
Now we get to the one that really got people in a tizzy, bloodbending without a full moon. This one seems to annoy people because, like a lot of things in this video, it seemed inconsistent with what was established in The Last Airbender. Keyword there being seemed, because this is not inconsistent. In The Last Airbender, it's established that bloodbending is a technique that waterbenders can only do with the power of the full moon. People who didn't pay attention think that this rule also applies to the 3 bloodbenders we see in The Legend of Korra, when it's made pretty clear in the Amon flashback episode that Yakone was born with one of these mutations or rare abilities, with his being to bloodbend without a full moon. He, of course, passed this ability on to his kids Tarlok and Noatak/Amon and trained them in using it.
In Naruto, I know you said you've never watched Naruto, so I'm going to explain a little bit of Naruto for you. In Naruto, they talk about certain powers that can only be passed down through blood or family ties called Kekkei Genkai. They are a rare MacGuffin that grant the ninja incredible abilities that no other ninja has access to. You have to be in the family. This is Avatar The Legend of Korra creating a Kekkei Genkai out of a technique that was so rare that only 2 waterbenders in the original show were shown to be able to do it, one of whom was locked away forever, and the other refused to do it other than twice because she considered it evil. Firstly, how did a genetic mutation take place in Yakone to allow him to do this when it's questionable how he even knew how to do it in the first place, considering I doubt Katara would teach anyone, and I doubt Hama was teaching anyone while locked up. The possible explanation is that Hama told the firebenders who captured her, and then rumor got out about this bloodbending art, and so maybe other waterbenders started experimenting. Maybe so. It's questionable, it's a stretch, but it's the only possible way I could think of, because I doubt Katara is going to go telling people about bloodbending. That was pretty traumatic for her to discover. Secondly, when have bloodline abilities ever been a thing in Avatar? Beforehand, I mean. Sokka just hand-waving bloodbending without the full moon away by saying that sometimes impossible things happen is little more than a cop-out, a sign the creators don't actually have a good explanation for us and are making what they want. And again, it's their right to make things what they want, but we have to acknowledge it's a bit inconsistent and a bit lacking in good explanation.
In my years, I've encountered people born with rare and unique bending abilities. I once bested a man with my trusty boomerang who was able to firebend with his mind. Why, even metal bending was considered impossible for all of history, until our esteemed chief of police, Toph Beifong, single-handedly developed the skill. The overwhelming amount of testimony and evidence has convinced this council that Yakone is one of these unique benders.
Thirdly, if he's this powerful in the daylight, where he can bloodbend everyone in a room without his hands and can try to escape, imagine what this guy could do with a full moon. Why is he just a gang leader? This dude could take over the city with that kind of power. He could bloodbend half the city in a full moon, steal their crap, and then leave. Or, heck, just bloodbend the council and kill them and become the new monarch of Yakone City. Why is he just relegating himself to gang leader? I know you said, oh, well, it's because you're going to say it's because there's still limitations and it's illegal. Yeah, but bank robbing's illegal too. People still do it. Killing is illegal, but people still do it. You know, if this guy was so afraid, oh man, it's illegal. Dang, what's he doing being a crime boss? You know, he has power, and people with power like Yakone are going to use it for pretty nefarious ends. And finally, how are they able to control people without hand motions? I rewatched the bloodbending battle in Last Airbender. Though Hama could make people fly around or slam into things, like you said in the Twitch video, she always used her hands. She was always in motion. There was still martial arts involved. How can these new bloodbenders do this with their minds alone? We see Amon being able to bloodbend wolves, a pack of them, without moving. We see Yakone still handcuffed, able to bloodbend an entire room of people. It removes any of the martial arts within the story and makes it just the Force, as I said in a previous video. This new form of bloodbending, to me, is lazy, uninspired, and breaking rules that didn't need to be broken. But I suppose that's my opinion.
Tarlok stopped practicing bloodbending when his brother ran away, which is why he has to physically move to use it, unlike his brother. And it's clear that intense training of this ability allowed Yakone and Amon to bloodbend people without moving, or at least not noticeably moving. The key difference between this and the rules established in The Last Airbender are that Amon and Yakone are established to be pretty clear exceptions to the rule.
Yes, and that's the problem. You just said it. People don't like them because they break the rules. Why are they exceptions to the rules, and why should we accept exceptions to the rules? You can't just you can't just say that and expect people to go, oh gee, well I guess that's that. Silly me for expecting consistency. Look, in one of your Twitch responses that you said that you can more easily excuse inconsistencies as long as the outcome of something is cool. And that's fine. But some of us are not so accepting, and we expect consistency from the show that previously had done so well in keeping things consistent in its rules and lore. Now we're creating a villain who can break a rule and literally be an exception to it with no better explanation than mutation, which leads to more questions than any satisfying answers.
The reason we don't see bloodbending used more throughout The Legend of Korra is due to the limitations of the technique, with it being illegal in Republic City and likely the rest of the world, and can only be done under a full moon, which is about 3 nights per month if we assume that the Avatar world has the same lunar cycle as Earth. Even if you want to argue that they shouldn't have included this mutation and made exceptions to the bloodbending rules, what purpose would limiting your villain serve? Wouldn't it be more threatening to have a villain who doesn't play by the rules, who can control you at literally any time as opposed to 3 nights a month? They made Amon and his father the exceptions to the rules of bloodbending for dramatic effect. It increases tension.
Brace yourself. This is going to get deep. All right, let's propose a hypothetical. In the last battle of Avatar: The Last Airbender, when Aang is facing Fire Lord Ozai, if Fire Lord Ozai suddenly revealed he could bend all 4 elements just like Aang, would we be okay with that? I mean, sure, it breaks the rules of the world, but he's at least more intimidating. It's more dramatic this way. Let's face it, he's not really that intimidating when he's finally revealed, so let's just fix him up a little. Sure, it was clearly established only the Avatar could bend all 4 elements, but it's an unfair matchup to have this guy who can only firebend, even under a comet, fighting a dude with all these past lives and the power of Rava at his command. Why would I want to limit my villain? Surely no one will mind if I give him the same amount of power as the Avatar, so long as the final battle is now even more epic and dramatic. Hey, I've increased tension, so that means the consistency is irrelevant so long as the drama is increased. And if the response to that was, that doesn't make sense, that's the point I'm making. See the issue? When you create rules for a world, the characters must abide by them, including the villains. Why? Because the boundaries are what create the drama. If those rules are bent or broken, a really good explanation must be given. Otherwise, the question must be asked why the rules exist at all. Why can the villain exist outside the rules of reality, but the hero can't? If the only excuse is, well, we need an intimidating villain, then I'm sorry, that's a terrible excuse. If you have to break rules of the world just to add drama, then there's a serious problem with the story you're writing. Let's use another example. Joker from the Batman, one of the most beloved villains in all of fiction. Can you imagine the absolute cop-out if he suddenly revealed he had superpowers? Or, no, better one than that. Lex Luthor, a dude who's basically a normal human, who used his wealth, cunning, and genius to manipulate the world and become one of Superman's greatest threats. In all retrospect, he shouldn't be Superman's greatest threat. He shouldn't be Superman's arch rival or arch enemy. He should be a normal businessman, a bad one, but a normal businessman. He didn't need to suddenly obtain superpowers. He didn't need to out of nowhere reveal he's secretly a Kryptonian. No, he worked within the boundaries of the rules of the DC universe. Ironically, in the DC universe, it's the heroes like Superman who are often bending or breaking rules. But he didn't, and he was still an intimidating villain. Hell, he and Joker are more consistently bound by the rules of their world than Superman or Batman, and yet they still work well as villains.
That's right, conspiracy buff. I spent $75 million on a fake presidential campaign, all just to tick Superman off.
Amon having to break the rules of his world will just be a threat. Just to be a threat makes him pathetic as a villain in comparison. Do you realize how badass it would have been if this dude was a non-bender and he actually was able to beat the Avatar without bending? That would be so cool. Think about how cool Jet looked when he was able to actually fight toe-to-toe with Aang without bending, with just his hook swords. It made him look cooler, it made him look tougher, and it made sense when he fought Zuko on equal footing. He was a tough opponent and he didn't need bending. That made him more intimidating, but no, he's got bloodbending without a full moon. And you want to know the hilarious thing? Here's the hilarious thing. It would have been cool if he only used bloodbending on the full moon. It would have been good for us as the audience. Maybe the characters notice that Amon never shows up in public except on certain nights. Maybe the people whose bending he's taken only lose them on the night of a full moon. Maybe Tenzin or someone else might draw a conclusion, realize that it's bloodbending, and they try to warn people. Word gets out that Amon could be a bloodbender, and Amon, knowing this would happen, declares it to be a plot to discredit him and undermine their cause. It would be fake news, which only adds more fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, Amon continues to plot and plan things, so he only has to move around or make actions on certain nights. Not only does this make his powers fit with the lore, but it makes him seem more manipulative, more cunning, more smart, more able to play the angles. Much like Toph being blind but learning metal bending, Amon could only bloodbend under certain conditions and use those conditions to his advantage. That would have made him a better villain to me, and it would have respected the audience's intelligence. Instead of just giving an obvious flashback with an obvious clue, with an obvious character that they threw in out of nowhere, it would actually have been good for the newcomers to actually make connections and go, wait a second, full moon. Every time Amon is shown, there's always a full moon. What if? And then they draw the conclusion. For comparison, let's compare the Emperor using Force lightning versus Amon bloodbending with a full moon. Some have argued that the Emperor suddenly shooting lightning from his hands in The Last Jedi was out of left field, and yes, it was, but technically it broke no rules. The Force had been shown to exist between all life forms, and that Jedi and Sith could stretch out with their feelings.
The Force? The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together. Stretch out with your feelings.
If one lashed out with their feelings of hate, then perhaps they could create a physical extension of pain and power through the Force and thus create lightning. A stretch, yes, but one that can still exist within the established lore. Amon bloodbending isn't the same because bloodbending was a pre-established power with clear rules to follow, and Amon said, screw the rules, I want to be scary. Perhaps if they established he had maybe an amulet or an artifact from the spirit world, or maybe he worked out a deal with the moon and ocean spirits. The moon and ocean spirits might be a little mad at benders, or a little mad at people for what happened to the moon spirit that one time. So maybe he worked out a deal with them or something like that. I don't know. Or maybe he had some kind of deal with the spirit world, much like the Shadow Man and Princess and the Frog had a deal with those spirits, which would explain his unnatural bloodbending and his ability to remove bending. That might have been decent and intimidating. I've gone on too long about this point, but what you said there needed to be addressed. It's not about limiting a villain. It's about keeping the characters consistent to the rules that are established. If that limits your character to the point that they're no longer interesting, then your character needs work.
Another problem people have with bloodbending is how Amon uses it to permanently take away other people's bending. Oh, this doesn't make sense. How does blood people take people's bending away? That's dumb. So bad. I'm glad you asked this question, my idiotic friend. So let's have a little lesson about chi and bending. In the Avatar world, chi is the energy source behind all bending. It's an energy that lives within every living being and is what allows benders to bend. As both the Guru and Iroh explain, chi flows throughout the body. And as demonstrated by Ty Lee and the chi blockers, chi can be blocked physically. If you can block someone's chi from a hit in the right spot on the outside, then just imagine the kind of damage that can be done from the inside. Amon somehow found a way to physically and permanently block these chi paths from the inside using bloodbending, preventing the bender from accessing their chi, therefore permanently removing the person's bending. It's never stated specifically how he's able to do this, but again, it's the kind of thing where it's explained just enough to where you can suspend your disbelief, which again, adds to the tension. It's scarier when you don't know how it works. And last but not least, we have energy bending, which is the ability to bend life energy itself and has only been used by avatars and lion turtles. Korra gains access to energy bending at the end of season 1, but the extent to which she can use it is pretty limited, since at that point she could only restore people's bending that had been blocked by Amon, which makes perfect sense, by the way, since life energy is more powerful than any physical block.
Why? I'm not saying you're wrong. You could be right. But what's the evidence? What are you basing this on? Not saying you're wrong. Again, I'm not saying you're wrong, but please explain. What evidence do we have to show that energy bending is stronger than any physical block? Just all I want is the evidence. That's all I want to see in the Twitch response. Just that's all I want, because you could very well be right. I have no evidence to disprove you, but like you said, energy bending doesn't really have a lot of rules. So what are the rules that say it can beat this? That's all I'm saying.
In Season 2, she takes further advantage of this ability by using it to astral project her own spirit, not Rava, in the fight against Unavatsu with a little power-up from the Tree of Time. She used it twice in Season 4, first to free the souls of people taken into the spirit world by the spirit vines, and again at the end of the series where she blocks the spirit cannon, opening a new spirit portal. Of course, people think that this is all bullshit, though I find that a lot of the issues people have with it are narrative issues over logistical ones. Like, the logic behind energy bending was and has always been vague on purpose to keep the mysticism intact, so most don't seem to have a problem with it in that regard. The problems arise in how it's used, and apparently the Legend of Korra ruins it by expanding upon it. Starting to see a little bit of a pattern here. Let's just get this out of the way. Energy bending has and will always be a Deus Ex Machina. It was like that in The Last Airbender, and it's still like that in The Legend of Korra. People always bitch and moan about Korra getting her powers given to her, when Aang also did virtually the same thing, and it's not even limited to just energy bending, though we already talked about that earlier in the video, so let's stick to energy bending. I feel as though energy bending is the easiest form of bending to explain just by virtue of what it is. It's bending life energy, which is so fucking general that there are virtually no rules for it. And every time it is used in The Legend of Korra, its use is explained. And even if it's not explained directly, one can easily infer what is happening. For example, if you can use energy bending to take bending away, it stands to reason that you could use it to do the opposite. Need to commune with spirit pods? Energy bending. Want to stop a blast of literal spirit vine energy? Energy bending. It's a technique that has always been there for plot convenience, but if anything, its continued use throughout The Legend of Korra made it a lot less contrived.
You said it. You said the magic word. Plot convenience. Korra has access to a bending style that no one else in the world is shown to be able to do right now. A power she did not learn on her own, but was granted to her by Aang. A power you admitted she had no training in, but was still able to return bending, and was later able to create a kaiju of herself with no training, able to free souls from a spirit pod with no training or teaching, and able to block a spirit blast without training or teaching. And you can't argue it's just Aang as her past life teaching her how to do it, because Aang's gone, remember? All of her past lives are gone by the end of Season 2. So these are all of her doing. So it's a power that can do whatever the plot needs it to do, and only Korra has been shown to use it. Remind me, she's not the Mary Sue? And yes, I know, Aang had it too. But I'm not going to argue it wasn't stupid when Aang used it. I did not like how Aang used it as a major ass pull to defeat the Fire Lord. I'm not excusing that. I never have. But that said, neither can you simply point fingers and say Aang did it too and somehow make that an excuse for Korra. All Aang did was remove bending. Korra has done far more. As you said, it exists for plot convenience, a power that lets Korra do what she needs to do when the plot demands it. And that is a typical symptom of a Mary Sue character. You've made great points as to why she is not a Mary Sue. You've done a lot of good there. I'm willing to concede on some of those points. But here, I don't think you can deny, or at least I'm not going to deny, that the fact that she has this plot-convenient power that does what she needs it to do when she needs to do it is not a Mary Sue trait.
But I will say, kaiju of spirit energy, that might be where the line gets drawn if it hasn't been drawn already.
In that, we are in agreement. God, Season 2 was a bad season. Weak villains, lots of retcons, and a kaiju finishing battle. In fact, you notice how all the retcons you brought up in your last video came from Season 2? I was just waiting for Godzilla and the Power Rangers to show up in that fight, if I'm being honest.
The other major argument I see regarding bending is that the way The Legend of Korra uses it somehow devalues it, and that's fucking stupid, because nothing has really changed since The Last Airbender. Traditional martial arts are used less in favor of more modern fighting styles, but that doesn't make bending less valuable, since there's still a fair amount of traditional martial arts used in the series, and bending is still used in everyday society. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in another section. In fact, the mixing of bending styles was something that started in The Last Airbender, with Iroh's lightning redirection technique being based on water bending, and there are several scenes where characters use techniques of other bending styles. For example, in Katara's fight against Hama, instead of letting the water blast flow and redirecting it like is taught in waterbending, like we see Paku doing here, she instead opts to stand her ground and break the blast head on, something that's more typical of earthbending that she probably learned from Toph. Katara using an earthbending technique with waterbending doesn't devalue either style, and by that same logic, the MMA stuff that we see in The Legend of Korra doesn't either, especially when you consider that there are still people out there who use the traditional styles. Pro bending also seems to be a big point of contention in relation to this, and it's equally as dumb. People seem to think that bending shouldn't be used for sport like we see in pro bending, yet these people will disregard the fact that bending was used for sport all the fucking time in The Last Airbender. The Airbenders played airball, Fire Nation kids played hide and explode, Earthbenders had underground earthbending wrestling rings. Bending has always been used for sport, so The Legend of Korra doing it doesn't change a goddamn thing. Bending styles changing and evolving over time, something that should be expected, doesn't make The Legend of Korra bad. You're gonna have to hit me with something better than that, if you want me to believe you.
I trained in Muay Thai, Tiger Kung Fu, Capoeira, Karate, and Judo. At least, yeah, that's the number. All martial arts have been adapted. All of these martial arts have been adapted for ring combat. I have no issue with bending being used in sports or games. I have no issue with bending techniques being somewhat modernized or altered somehow. I admit, though, it's just a little bit disheartening to some degree for me. Well, it does work, and it technically isn't a problem. I always admired how the individual bending styles not only involve their own mental outlook, but their own unique fighting forms that mimic the elements they bent. Tai Chi represents water because Tai Chi is all about fluid movement, redirection, and using an opponent's power against them. Earth is based on Hungar, which has solid and rigid stances and which has focused and concentrated movements, mimicking the ruggedness of rock. Firebending is based on Shaolin Kung Fu, which we discussed. Airbending is based on Bagua, which is about evasion, avoiding combat, and getting behind your opponent to avoid their strikes and hit a weak point or get them off balance. When a firebender punch in pro bending looks almost exactly like an earthbender punch, it just feels like something's being lost, but that's personal for me. That's not a problem with the show. That's a me problem. My issue with pro bending is that it had no impact on the story as a whole. It was there as a plot point for season 1 to introduce the characters, but it never mattered again after season 1, and the outcome of the matches had no impact on the overall story. Just an idea presented that never went anywhere. My final point to this whole video is this. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone, especially not Matt or the fans of the show in this video. The show and its creators are free to do what they please with the bending, as the creators of the show have that liberty. While metal bending, lava bending, spirit bending, and lightning bending were kind of open-handed issues for me, the blood bending one just bugs me. It leaves out a lot of context. It breaks established rules, which even Matt admits are being broken, but dismisses this by saying that it adds drama and makes the character more intimidating. Bit of writing advice. If a story or plot must break rules to function, you need to rethink your story or rules. If your villain must break established rules to be intimidating or to create drama, you need to rethink your villain. If a heroine can have access to a power of plot convenience with no established limitation or rules to limit it, or any training she must undergo to use it properly, and she's not a Mary Sue, then what is a Mary Sue? Food for thought. Finally, your big point at the beginning of the video was, I don't understand how having more of these bending styles devalues them. Well, simply put, the more of something you have, the less value it has. So the more we add these legendary, cool bending styles, the less value they can have on themselves. The more metal benders there are, the less cool it is. Because at first, Toph was the cool, badass, only metal bender in the world. Now lots of people can do it. At first, lightning bending was something only a handful of firebenders, possibly only 3, could do. Now you can line up a factory with them. That's why it devalues them. Doesn't make it not make sense. Just means that it's not going to be as cool anymore. It just means it's not going to be as valuable. But that's all I have for this video. This was an especially long one. I know I got very passionate, and I apologize for that, but these are big deals to me. These are things that I really wanted to address. We'll tune in next time for his miscellaneous stuff. The stuff, I guess, that he didn't have a actual title for. But anyway, we'll get into that then. As always, guys, I'm always open to learning. I'm really looking forward to the Twitch response to this one. Please go subscribe to Matt CMG if you have not yet. Go and leave a comment and like in my video. Subscribe if you haven't already. You guys are awesome. Always happy to see my guys and gals watch my videos. Tune in next time to catch the next part of this video series. And to just catch my next video. Again, I mean no harassment. I'm always open to learning. Take care, guys, and I will see you later.